Welcome you. Thanks for sending over this really interesting batch of material on economic inequality.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff.
And as we've been digging into it, this theme keeps popping up these big stories, right? These grand narratives that try to explain the whole picture of inequality.
Exactly. The why, the how it changes, what it all means.
So that's what we're going to tackle for you today, using the insights from your sources.
hmm And our mission here, really, is to get a solid grip on these narratives. Why do we need to look at them over time?
Right.
What makes that so difficult? And, how do our own perspectives kind of shape what we see?
Okay.
We'll touch on big historical moments, political factors, trying to give you that clearer picture without, getting lost in the weeds.
Okay, great. So let's start there. These grand narratives. What are we really talking about? It sounds like it's more than just pointing at stats.
Yeah, definitely more. They're basically the main explanations that society comes up with for why inequality happens, how it ebbs and flows through history, and, well, what the consequences are.
The stories we tell ourselves about it.
Pretty much. Who gets what and why. That's the core of it.
So not just today's snapshot, but the longer movie. Why is it so vital to assess these stories, these narratives, historically?
Well, that's really key. Looking back lets us see if these explanations actually hold water over time.
Mm-hmm.
If the things really happen the way the narrative suggests in different eras, it also helps us spot, biases or maybe blind spots within a particular story.
Ah, okay.
And understanding those past patterns, how inequality shifted then, give us some pretty useful clues about what's driving it now and maybe where it's headed, which is, super important for policy thinking.
Makes sense. Get some perspective. But wow, trying to piece together economic history from like centuries ago, that sounds incredibly hard.
Oh, it is, absolutely.
What are the big roadblocks when you try to assess these narratives way back when?
Well, first off, just finding good data, reliable data,
Right.
especially the further back you go. Comprehensive info on income, wealth distribution, it often just wasn't collected or it doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
Then there are methodological problems. How do you even compare things accurately across centuries? Economies were totally different. Even what people meant by income or wealth could have changed.
So we might be comparing apples and, I don't know, oranges. Or maybe even stranger fruit.
Exactly. It's like trying to assemble this giant incomplete puzzle where the pieces themselves keep changing shape over time.
Huh.
And then you've got to be super careful about historical context. You can't just slap today's economic theories onto the past.
Right.
You have to think about the social structures, the technology, the politics of that time, avoiding what historians call presentism or present-day bias. It's a constant balancing act.
It's like judging the past by today's standards when they had totally different priorities.
Precisely. It's easy to fall into that trap.
Okay, so data gaps, comparing across time, our own biases, lots of challenges. Now, the sources you sent mentioned reader environments. What's that about?
Ah, yeah, that's interesting. It's basically about how our own background, our own lens, shapes how we interpret these grand narratives.
Our perspective.
Exactly. Think about it. An economist, a sociologist, a political scientist, they'll probably approach inequality differently, right?
Sure.
The economist might zoom in on, say, market forces, incentives, maybe policy effects.
Okay.
The sociologist, they might focus more on social structures, power dynamics, maybe cultural norms. And the political scientist could be looking hard at the political system itself, policy choices, who holds political power.
So same problem, inequality, but different angles, different root causes they emphasize.
You got it. And it's not just academic fields either. Our own personal values, our politics, our life experiences, they all play a role in how we react to and evaluate these big stories about who gets what.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. We don't come to it as blank slates. Now, another thing that really stood out in the materials was this idea that economic inequality isn't just one single thing.
Oh, absolutely critical point.
Why is that distinction so important?
Because we talk about it like it's monolithic, but it's really not. For instance, income inequality, that's about earnings, right? Wages, salaries, investment returns. That can behave very differently than wealth inequality.
Which is more about assets.
Exactly. Property, stocks, savings, the stuff people own. The patterns and the reasons behind shifts in income versus wealth can be quite distinct.
Okay.
And even within income or wealth, you have to look at different parts of the ladder. What's happening at the very top, say the top 1%, that might be driven by totally different things than what's causing wages to stagnate for people at the bottom or in the middle.
Right. So a narrative could maybe explain why the super rich are getting richer,
Yeah,
but completely miss why, say, middle-class wages aren't growing.
precisely. So when we look at a grand narrative, we have to ask, okay, which part of inequality is this actually trying to explain? And does it do a good job across the whole spectrum? Or just one slice?
Got it. Need to be specific. Now, history isn't smooth, right? There are huge disruptions, wars, new technologies, pandemics. How do those big shocks fit into these grand narratives?
Yeah, those are major game changers. They can fundamentally redraw the economic map and consequently inequality patterns.
Like how?
Well, wars obviously destroy wealth, but they can also lead to redistribution through things like taxes, social programs, and big shifts in the labor market. Tech revolutions, they create massive new opportunities, new industries, but they can also really widen gaps if only certain people have the skills or the capital to benefit.
Yeah, we see that.
And pandemics, as we know all too well now, can hit vulnerable groups hardest and cause huge economic shifts. It's kind of sobering how these big, often unpredictable events can just shake everything up.
So a good grand narrative needs to be able to account for these shocks, not just ignore them.
Definitely. A really robust narrative should explain how these big events interact with the longer-term inequality trends. Do they just cause a temporary blip?
Or do they set things on a totally new course?
Exactly. Some narratives might emphasize one aspect over the other.
Okay. And what about the role of politics? Governments, institutions. Seems like policies must matter a lot.
Oh, undeniably crucial. Government actions on taxes, welfare, labor laws, education, even how property rights work. These have a massive impact on who gets what.
Right.
And it's not just formal policies. It's also about the type of political system. How strong are unions, levels of corruption, how well does the legal system function? All that stuff plays a part.
So different grand narratives probably put different weight on these political factors versus, say, market forces.
Exactly right.
Right.
Some stories might say, oh, it's mostly technology and markets driving inequality.
Yeah.
Others will argue, no, it's really about political choices and how institutions have changed. So evaluating how well a narrative deals with that political and institutional side is, well, it's essential.
This really helps understand the past and present better. But the future. Can these narratives actually help us predict where inequality is going?
Ah, the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look, understanding the past through these narratives is super valuable. But predicting the future, that's always going to be tricky.
Why is that?
Well, there are always unforeseen events, right? New technologies we can't imagine yet. Political shifts, global crises.
Black swans.
Kind of. And the way all these factors interact is incredibly complex. It doesn't always follow neat, predictable patterns. Plus, remember those data gaps we've talked about for the past?
Yeah.
Makes it even harder to build a model you can confidently project way out into the future.
So they're not crystal balls then? We shouldn't expect them to tell us exactly what happens next year or in 10 years.
Not really, no. It's probably more useful to think of them as tools to help us identify potential risks, maybe some opportunities on the horizon, more like possible scenarios than precise forecasts.
Okay, makes sense. Manage expectations. So if they can't perfectly predict, how does understanding these narratives help in a practical sense? Like for policy?
Well, thinking critically about these different explanations can really improve policy debates.
How so?
By understanding the strengths and weaknesses of why inequality might be changing, policymakers can make, hopefully, more informed choices about what to do.
Give me an example.
Okay, so if one narrative strongly suggests, say, rapid technological change is the main culprit behind rising inequality,
Right.
then maybe you prioritize policies focused on education, job retraining, helping people adapt to new skill demands.
Makes sense.
But if another narrative really emphasizes, say, weakened labor laws and protections, then maybe the focus shifts more towards strengthening worker rights, collective bargaining, minimum wages, that sort of thing.
So it helps target the solutions better.
Exactly. And understanding the different stories also helps anticipate potential side effects or unintended consequences of policies. It leads to, ideally, a more well-rounded strategy.
So it pushes us beyond simplistic, one-size-fits-all answers for a really complex problem.
Precisely. It forces us to appreciate just how multifaceted this challenge really is.
Well, this deep dive, looking at these grand narratives through the lens of the sources you sent, it's really highlighted the complexity, hasn't it? So many angles to consider. It's definitely clear there aren't easy answers, and that grappling with the past, even with all its challenges, is pretty crucial for understanding now and thinking about what's next.
Absolutely. I think if there's one key takeaway, it's that need to look past the simple explanations.
Mm.
You have to dig into all the interacting forces, history, the type of inequality, economics, politics. It's all connected.
So, a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Considering all these different narratives, these historical turning points we've discussed,
Yeah.
what do you think might be the most significant factor shaping economic inequality in the near future, and
Right.
why?
How do you see these forces playing out?
It's definitely something to reflect on. Thank you so much for sharing your sources and for joining us on this deep dive.